Okay, picture this. You're walking down an American street, but those giant glass and steel skyscrapers, gone. The endless, mind-numbing drone of highway traffic completely vanished. That aggressive, modern rush we're all so used to has just evaporated. Instead, you're looking at hand-painted vintage storefronts, historic theaters, beautiful, ornate wooden balconies, and classic neon signs that honestly look like they belong to a totally different generation. Well, in this explainer today, we are going to dive into some truly fascinating architectural anomalies that are hiding right in plain sight. We're exploring the streets America forgot. You know, when you actually stand in one of these spots, a pretty profound question naturally hits you. Where exactly did history go? You look around and wonder where the modern world went. Now, don't get me wrong, the modern world is absolutely still here, probably buzzing away on an interstate just a few miles down the road. But scattered all across the country, tucked away in quiet valleys or sitting peacefully by rivers, there are these incredible streets that time just seemed to miss. They are literal, physical time capsules where decades and sometimes even centuries of American history are still perfectly visible in the landscape. It's a pretty stark contrast when you think about it. For the better part of a century, the rest of the nation changed at breakneck speed. We enthusiastically paved right over our past, trading local brick-and-mortar shops for absolute seas of asphalt parking lots, neon strip malls, sprawling suburbs, and those massive windowless shopping centers. And yet, against all the heavy pressures of modern development, these unique corridors managed to hold onto their original souls. These were once booming commercial centers built around railroads, mining rushes, and waves of immigration. And today, they stand as physical remnants of a completely different way of life. Part 1, Rivers, Coasts, and Commerce. Let's kick things off at the edges of the map.
Our first stop is Front Street in Lewis, Delaware, which happens to be one of the state's oldest communities. And what you'll notice right out of the gate here is this really powerful concept, the living town. See, in places like Lewis, you aren't buying a ticket to stare past a velvet rope or looking at some carefully curated museum exhibit. No, you are stepping into a community where the past is actively used every single day. You're literally buying your morning coffee in a building that has stood for 2 centuries. People are still living in these old houses. Real businesses are still operating in these spaces. Generations are walking on the exact same floorboards their ancestors did. So if we line these living towns up side by side, a really fascinating pattern emerges. Basically, geography dictated their survival and their style. Up in Lewis, Delaware, the traditional architecture was entirely shaped by maritime merchants who relied on the sea. Down in Natchez, Mississippi, the whole town was defined by the massive wealth of the Mississippi River trade. Their streets are this amazing multi-era blend where you can actually watch architecture change over time. Huge historic homes sitting right next to old brick commercial buildings. And then you have Key West, Florida, which was defined by extreme maritime isolation. That isolation practically forced them to create a really compact, low-rise architectural style. And speaking of Key West, you've got to look at Duval Street. It stands in stunning contrast to what we typically picture when we think of modern Florida. Instead of those massive air-conditioned mega resorts and sprawling theme parks, you get this compact little oasis. Because it was so isolated historically, and because they literally lacked modern building materials back in the day, everything had to be built low to the ground just to survive the hurricanes. It creates this beautiful irony today. You've got visitors walking around glued to the latest smartphones, but they're completely surrounded by low-rise wooden buildings and colorful narrow alleys from much earlier generations. The past didn't disappear here. It just became the seamless backdrop for the present.
Part 2, Cultures and Crossroads. As we start heading inland, we start finding streets that serve as incredible physical records of America's cultural melting pots. Down in Louisiana, places like Front Street along the Cane River Lake in Natchitoches and Bourbon Street in New Orleans, they didn't just pop up overnight. They are the physical result of generations of intense cultural layering. Think of it like a timeline. First, Native American roots laid the literal paths and trade routes. Then, French and Spanish colonials arrived and completely changed the roof lines and the masonry. This was then deeply shaped by African and Caribbean populations who brought entirely new life, craftsmanship, and ironwork to the architecture. And it all culminated as American expansion pushed westward. When you walk these streets, you are literally walking through hundreds of years of cultural collision. Take Bourbon Street in the French Quarter of New Orleans, for example. Now, today we all know it's famous for blazing neon lights, plastic cups, and thumping music. But right beneath that loud modern edutainment scene rests a physical landscape dictated entirely by the 1700s. The incredibly narrow streets, the buildings standing shoulder to shoulder, those iconic heavy iron balconies looming right over the sidewalks. They're a dramatic rejection of the wide, sprawling grid layouts of modern cities. It's this intense sensory contrast that constantly reminds visitors, hey, this city was breathing long before today's America was fully formed. Now, heading north to Memphis, Tennessee, Beale Street shows us a totally different kind of cultural crossroads. It started organically as a crucial hub for the African American community, just densely packed with local businesses, photographers, and performers. But from that vibrant foundation, it evolved into something that literally changed the world. It became the birthplace of the blues. That's a genre that went on to profoundly influence almost every later form of popular music. Today, it's an international cultural landmark. You're not just walking through an old-time town, you are walking on the literal foundation of modern popular music. How cool is that? Part 3, Frontiers and Deep Roots. Let's push out toward the frontier and into the heartland. Check out Front Street in Bisbee, Arizona. This place is a complete reversal of what we expect an American town to look like. Modern America usually means flat grids, aggressively wide roads, and huge parking lots, right? Bisbee is the exact opposite. Because it was built entirely around the sheer grit of the mining industry, the historic center is highly compact and incredibly vertical. We're talking twisting roads, narrow alleys, and old brick buildings constructed directly into the jagged mountains by 19th century miners. Cars are practically useless in parts of it. Residents literally have to climb hundreds of stairs just to get to their own front doors. The physical town itself still carries the heavy, exhausting evidence of the people who carved it out of the rock. Meanwhile, up in the Black Hills of South Dakota, we find Deadwood. Now, this town was born out of the absolute chaos of 19th century gold rush wealth. Businesses, wild saloons, hotels, they were all thrown up almost overnight in this absolute frenzy by people just hoping to strike it rich. It was loud, it was dangerous, and it was purely functional. But miraculously, so many of those preserved wooden storefronts and old-fashioned painted signs are still standing today. They basically let you walk straight into what was once a chaotic frontier boomtown. The buildings themselves act as a very tangible time machine straight back to the Wild West. Moving eastward, we hit a stark contrast to that loud boomtown vibe. The quiet streets of St. Genevieve, Missouri, reveal a much earlier, deeply serene history. This area shows incredibly deep French colonial roots, and these small, locally organized communities that relied really heavily on pre-highway river trade. The architecture reflects early, intricate European settlement patterns that predate the modern United States entirely. It's just a powerful reminder that long before we had skyscrapers and modern suburbs, complex European settlements were already quietly thriving right along the Mississippi River. Part 4. The Ultimate Time Capsule. If you really want to understand the power of a preserved street, we have to go to our #1 location. Which brings us to Main Street in Galena, Illinois. Honestly, Galena takes the top spot because it is just completely unparalleled. In most towns, you might find one or two historic buildings stubbornly holding on, looking kind of awkward, surrounded by a modern bank or a fast food drive-thru. But in Galena, you have a continuous, living streetscape. You can look down Main Street and see nothing but the 19th century. Blocks and blocks of decorative brick facades, large mercantile windows, sweeping architectural details. It makes the entire area feel like this massive panoramic illusion. But again, there are no movie cameras here. These are real, independent businesses and restaurants in active, everyday use by the locals. Part 5. The America That Remained. To really get why places like Galena are so incredibly rare today, we have to look at the massive sociological shift in American urban planning. We started out in this golden age of highly walkable local communities. The street was essentially the town's living room. It's where people worked, gossiped, shopped, and watched movies just steps from their own front doors. But then came the aggressive takeover of the automobile and those expanding suburbs, which pulled people away from the center into isolated developments. Finally, massive interstate highway connections and eventually the quiet digital isolation of online shopping caused the traditional vibrant downtown to fade dramatically from the national landscape. Yet against literally all those insurmountable odds, these specific streets survived. But how? Well, it's a crazy mix of passion, economics, and sheer luck. Some were fiercely protected by stubborn local residents who literally stood in front of bulldozers because they knew their cultural worth. In other cases, the heavy stone and brick buildings simply became way too expensive to tear down and replace. And for others, they survived by pure accidental chance. The new interstate highway just happened to bypass the town by a single mile, inadvertently saving its soul from modern development. If there is one big takeaway from these hidden downtowns, with their faded signs and leaning brick facades, It's that they are not magical places where time literally stopped. They aren't frozen in amber, right? The people who lived there experienced the exact same wars, technological leaps, and economic crashes as the rest of the country. They changed with time, but they somehow miraculously kept their physical shell. They exist today for one very simple, beautifully human reason. Someone, at some point, looked at these old bricks and decided they were worth keeping. They are places where the past was simply allowed to survive, giving all of us a physical, tangible bridge to the generations that walked these exact same sidewalks long before us. So the next time you're on the road, I want to challenge you to look past the glossy, famous landmarks. Find the small town. Find the faded, painted sign, the local diner, because it really makes you wonder, what hidden chapter of American history is waiting right outside your door? Where is the forgotten street in your town?